Hello, my name is Rachel, and I want to share with you an experience that truly changed my life. A few months ago, something happened that completely shifted my perspective on life and faith. What started as an ordinary day quickly turned into something beyond anything I could have imagined. In just a few moments, I found myself in a completely different reality. I fainted, and what I saw during that time left me speechless. Jesus appeared to me and revealed something terrifying, the truth about the mark of the beast. I feel compelled to share this experience because I believe it serves as a warning that everyone needs to hear. It was a typical morning. I woke up, went through my usual routine, and started thinking about the errands I had to complete that day. I had no idea that my life was about to take an unexpected turn. I remember feeling a little off, as if something was weighing on me, but I brushed it off. I convinced myself that it was just stress or perhaps a lack of sleep. I continued with my day, dismissing the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. By noon, I was at home, trying to finish some chores, when the sensation became overwhelming. I was standing in the kitchen when a sudden wave of dizziness hit me, something unlike anything I had ever felt before. My vision blurred, my heart raced, and within seconds, everything went dark. I could no longer feel or hear anything. I had fainted. When I regained consciousness, I felt completely disconnected from the outside world. I was lying on the floor, confused and scared, but there was something distinctly different about the situation. The room felt strange, as if I wasn't truly there. Slowly, I sat up, trying to get my bearings, but everything around me seemed distant and surreal. It wasn't until I noticed a bright, impossibly soothing light that I realized something had drastically changed. It was hard to explain the feeling that washed over me. I wasn't afraid anymore, but I knew I was no longer in my kitchen. Instead, I felt a deep sense of calm and peace. An overwhelming presence filled the room, though I couldn't see its source. I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone. Someone was there. I tried to speak, but no words came out. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared before me. I immediately recognized who it was. Jesus. He didn't speak at first, but his eyes pierced through me, and I felt my entire life flash before me. It was as if he knew every thought, every mistake, and every fear I had ever had. Yet, there was no judgment in his gaze. He wasn't there to condemn me. He was there to show me something. And that's when everything began to make sense, including that strange feeling I had earlier. That nagging sensation that something was wrong had been building up to this moment. I wasn't meant to ignore it. I was meant to go through this experience in order to see something I would never have seen otherwise. That day changed everything for me, and deep down, I knew there was no turning back. The entire experience happened so fast that I didn't have time to process it. One moment, I was standing in my kitchen. The next, everything went black. I don't remember feeling myself fall, nor did I feel the impact when I hit the floor. It was as if I had been pulled out of my body and thrown into an infinite void. I remember trying to move, but nothing worked. My mind was racing, but my body felt completely frozen. Initially, I believed it was just a typical fainting episode. Maybe I hadn't consumed enough food or had consumed too much coffee. However, that morning was different. This wasn't just a blackout. It was something much more intense. The darkness around me felt thick, almost alive, and it wrapped around me in a way that made me feel completely confined. I could hear faint sounds, voices whispering, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. They weren't familiar voices, and the sound filled me with an uneasy feeling that I can't quite put into words. I tried to call out, but it was as if my voice no longer existed. It was terrifying, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely helpless. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, a soft golden light appeared. The light began to shine through the darkness, dim at first, like a small flicker in the distance, but it grew brighter with every passing second. The whispers faded, and I felt as though I could breathe again. Before I knew it, I was standing somewhere far different from my kitchen. It was a vast, endless space filled with light, something I had never seen before, but I knew it was real. The fear that had gripped me moments before was replaced by an overwhelming sense of tranquility. I was no longer alone. As I looked around for answers, I noticed Jesus standing there. He reached out his hand, radiating such pure love that tears welled up in my eyes. In that instant, everything changed. The darkness that had surrounded me seemed to dissipate, and my previous self no longer felt present. I knew I was standing in the presence of something divine. That overwhelming light made me realize I was no longer in my home. I had crossed over. Everything around me felt like I had entered a realm beyond human comprehension. It was surreal, but also incredibly real. It felt as though I had stepped into a different dimension, one where time didn't exist, and the air was filled with an indescribable peace. The atmosphere was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. There was no fear, pain, or confusion, only a sense of clarity washed over me. The ground beneath my feet wasn't solid, but it allowed me to walk effortlessly. The sky above wasn't blue, but it radiated a golden glow that seemed to pulse with life. I couldn't see the source of the light, but I could feel it touching every part of my being as I moved forward. I glimpsed places and people, but they weren't fully formed. I was only catching fleeting glimpses. I saw people praying in various realities, each more profound than the last. Some were crying, others were rejoicing, and there were those who were suffering all at once. It was as though I was being shown a panoramic view of humanity, both in the physical world and beyond. Then, something strange happened. I heard a voice, not loudly, but clearly and directly. It was coming from within me, rather than from around me. "You were chosen to see this, Rachel," the voice said. I didn't recognize it, but I knew it wasn't my own. The words carried a sense of weight and certainty that filled me with both awe and responsibility. I took another step forward and found myself standing before what looked like a shimmering veil. It was thin and almost transparent, just like me. I could see faint silhouettes moving behind it, and I knew I needed to pass through. But part of me hesitated. What would I find on the other side? As I paused, the voice spoke again. "Trust me." I took a deep breath and stepped through the veil. What I saw next left me utterly speechless. The world beyond was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. It was both beautiful and terrifying, filled with scenes of hope and despair. I saw angels and demons locked in battle, and people. As I stood there, making decisions that would determine their eternity, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency hanging in the air. It became clear to me that I was being shown a spiritual war, one that had been ongoing for an unimaginable length of time. It was a battle between good and evil, and most people were completely unaware of it. We were oblivious to what was happening around us, and every decision we made had consequences in this unseen realm. I understood why I was being shown all of this. This was not a dream or a hallucination. It was real, and I was meant to share it. As I crossed the veil, everything around me was consumed by a blinding light. The light was neither harsh nor painful, but so pure that I felt exposed, as though every part of myself, every thought, every hidden emotion was laid bare. At first, I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but I could feel its presence pulling me in. Through the radiance, I saw Jesus standing before me. I can't even begin to describe the depth of his love. He radiated power, and his eyes were filled with profound compassion. When I looked into them, I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of peace. It felt as though he saw right through me, every mistake, every doubt, every moment of pain. And yet, he didn't turn away. Instead, he extended his hand, and in that moment, I knew I was safe. Overcome with emotion, I fell to my knees, unable to speak. There were so many questions I wanted to ask, so much I wanted to understand, but words failed me. Jesus didn't need me to speak. He simply knew. His voice was gentle, yet authoritative when he spoke. "Fear not, for I am with you." With a single gesture, he began to show me things I couldn't yet comprehend. I saw a world on the brink of something monumental. People were oblivious to the dangers lurking beneath the surface. And he showed me cities filled with chaos, confusion, and deception. Then he pointed, and I saw people lined up, willingly accepting a strange mark that appeared on their hands and foreheads. They smiled, believing they were making life easier for themselves, but I could feel the darkness behind it. Jesus looked at me and said, "This is great deception." I watched in horror as those who received the mark began to change. They lost their sense of self, and their souls seemed to dim. Their eyes grew empty. They were no longer free. They belonged to something else, something they had been convinced was necessary, but they had no idea what they were giving up. Tears welled up in my eyes as I turned to face Jesus. He simply nodded, his face filled with sorrow. He placed his hand over my heart, and in that moment, I felt a warm sensation spread throughout my body. I knew then that he was giving me the strength to carry this message forward. The light around him grew even brighter, and though I didn't want to leave, I knew I had to return to the world I had left behind. The last thing I heard before I awoke was his voice whispering, "I am always with you." I woke up forever changed. Standing in the light, in the presence of Jesus, my heart pounded with a mix of awe and dread. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, and it felt as though the entire world unfolded before my eyes. I saw people in bustling cities, living their daily lives unaware of the spiritual war raging around them. I focused on those who were drawn to something, unaware of what they were being led to. They received a mark on their hands, and at first glance, it seemed harmless. They smiled, thinking they had found relief, but they didn't realize the cost. They had recently gained access to something they had long desired, but as I observed more closely, I noticed a darkness lurking behind it. Their expressions reflected the mark, a small, intricate symbol that was more than just an identifier. It was a form of control. Jesus' voice spoke softly, saying, "This is what they will not notice until it is too late." I saw how it changed them, how their thoughts were no longer their own. It was as if their souls were being suppressed. I could sense it as they moved mechanically, without questioning orders. Their eyes were empty, as if something essential had been taken from them. Jesus continued to show me scenes of governments, corporations, and leaders promoting the mark as a solution to global unity and security. The deception was subtle. It was advertised as a necessity for buying, selling, and even surviving day-to-day life. It was so appealing that people accepted it without hesitation. But then I noticed something. Ordinary people, like me, who sensed something was wrong, refused the mark. Some were shunned, mocked, and treated as outcasts, facing serious consequences. Due to their refusal, they lost their jobs, homes, and even their families. The pressure to conform was immense, yet a small group of steadfast individuals stood firm, holding on to their beliefs. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with unwavering faith and sorrow, and said, "Tell them, Rachel, that many will fall for this illusion, but my sheep will listen." His words gave me a sense of urgency. I knew that I had been shown this vision for a reason, to warn others before it was too late. The mark was about more than just control over transactions. It represented a spiritual consequence. I witnessed the gradual loss of free will, the erosion of humanity's connection to God. It was such a deep deception that even the strongest among us could fall victim to it. I realized that I, too, might be tempted to accept it before fully understanding the implications of what I had witnessed. As the vision faded, I was left with a heavy heart. The world needed to know the truth before it was too late. Jesus guided me through what seemed like glimpses of the future. In this world, everything had changed. The mark had become a part of daily life, integrated into every system: shopping, healthcare, transportation, and even communication. It was presented as progress, an advancement that made life easier and more convenient. But beneath the surface, I could feel myself suffocating. People walked around with their heads down, completely absorbed in themselves. They were unaware of the spiritual chains that bound them, and there was no room left for free thought, faith, or hope. Only those who had accepted the mark were allowed to survive. They were given the illusion of freedom, but their choices were pre-programmed, and their desires were manipulated. The world had transformed into an efficient yet lifeless machine. I saw families divided. Parents pleaded with their children not to accept the mark, while others encouraged it, believing it was for their own good. Churches sat empty, their doors locked, and faith was regarded as an outdated concept. Those who tried to resist were monitored, tracked, and eventually silenced. The most terrifying part of all was how easily it happened. There was no dramatic takeover or grand announcement. It occurred gradually. People lined up willingly, unaware that what began as a disguised convenience and necessity had turned into something far more sinister. No one questioned it as it slowly became a part of their lives. Jesus revealed the truth to me as I saw that the people believed they were securing their future, unaware of the eternal consequences of their decisions. The leaders behind this new system were motivated by something far darker than a mere desire for power. I glimpsed shadowy figures who thrived on deception and control, whispering lies into the ears of those in positions of power, convincing them they were serving a greater good. In doing what was best for humanity, I noticed a glimmer of hope. A small group of believers were hiding, refusing to abandon their faith in the face of persecution. They prayed together, encouraged one another, and kept their light alive amidst the overwhelming darkness. Jesus' words echoed in my heart. It will not be easy, but those who persevere will receive my crown of life. Fear and determination surged within me, knowing that the decision would not be simple. Yet, it was clear that the scenes before me were shifting, pulling me deeper into them. The deception that was spreading across the world wasn't limited to just the mark. It was driven by an ideology that included the media, celebrities, and influential figures. They promoted it as the ultimate solution to the world's problems, touting unity, progress, and safety. But their words were laced with subtle manipulation, and people, eager for answers, believed them. They thought they were making an informed decision, but in reality, they were being guided down a carefully planned path. The deception was so convincing that even those who had once held strong beliefs began to question themselves. I saw churches divided, with some leaders encouraging acceptance of the mark, even calling it part of God's plan, while others remained silent. False prophets emerged, claiming divine revelations, twisting scripture, and blending just enough truth with lies to make their message more believable. Jesus' voice echoed in my heart. They will come in my name, but they do not know me. The most heartbreaking sight was seeing people I once called friends, watching their families fall into this trap. They thought they were making the right choice, not realizing the spiritual chains being placed on them. I tried to scream, to warn them, but my voice couldn't reach them. Jesus gently reminded me, "Those who seek me with their whole hearts will discover the truth." It became clear that the battle was more than physical. Spiritually, I turned to Jesus, overwhelmed by what I had witnessed. He looked at me with deep compassion and said, "You must share what you have seen." The weight of his words settled heavily on my heart, and the urgency of the message he was entrusting to me made it clear that the world needed to know. The warning signs were already appearing: wars, division, confusion, and widespread fear. People were searching for answers in the wrong places, turning to the world instead of to God. Jesus had warned me that deception would come in unexpected ways, blending truth and lies so seamlessly that without him, it would be impossible to distinguish between the two. He told me to stay strong, trust in him, and encourage others to do the same. I knew speaking out would be difficult, but I couldn't remain silent. The world was on the brink of something significant, and every moment was crucial. Just as I was about to ask for more guidance, Jesus gently touched my forehead, and everything around me began to fade. I awoke with a gasp, back in my room, but my heart knew I had been given a mission. I tried to process everything Jesus had shown me, and then he directed my attention to an even greater truth: the battle between good and evil. It was no longer just a distant concept or metaphor. It was happening right now. A vast battlefield unfolded around us, stretching beyond my vision, filled with forces beyond human comprehension. On one side, I saw angels, majestic, radiant beings dressed in light standing firm. Their presence radiated peace, and their swords glowed with divine power. Despite their strength, the opposing forces were fully prepared for war. I noticed dark shadows, figures with eyes burning with malice. They moved deceptively, whispering lies into the ears of those on earth, leading them down paths they believed to be their own. Jesus explained that this battle was not fought with physical weapons. Instead, it was fought through every thought, decision, and action we make, all of which are guided by faith, prayer, and obedience. We must take positions on one side or the other. I saw how fear and doubt affected some people. One of the enemy's most powerful weapons is to trap people in confusion, preventing them from seeing the truth. It became clear to me that the battle wasn't only for our bodies, but also for our souls. The enemy worked tirelessly to distract, deceive, and destroy everything good, while God's forces remained vigilant, ready to guide and protect those who sought Him. I saw people standing firm in their faith, resisting temptations and lies. They shone like beacons of hope, their prayers acting as shields, deflecting the attacks of darkness. Jesus reminded me that while the enemy is powerful, God is greater than those who stand against us. He promised that He would never abandon me. It was in that moment that I realized something profound. Despite the chaos in the world, those who truly believe in Him are never alone. The battle continues, but victory belongs to those who remain faithful, even when witnessing the ongoing spiritual war. Then Jesus showed me something even more profound, the realities of heaven and hell. He wanted me to understand what was truly at stake. As soon as He touched my hand, I felt a surge of warmth, and I was transported to heaven. It was beyond anything words could describe. The colors were brighter, and the air was filled with music that spoke directly to my soul. An overwhelming sense of joy and love filled the space. I saw people dressed in white robes, their faces radiating peace and happiness as they stood in God's presence. They were free of pain, sorrow, and fear, and each soul was cherished. Love was the only language spoken. Before I could fully comprehend this beauty, I was suddenly transported to the opposite, hell. The shift was immediate, and I felt a crushing sense of despair. The air was thick with sorrow, fear, and the cries of tormented souls. The sounds of anguish echoed endlessly. I saw people reaching out, desperately begging for a second chance, but it was too late. They had ignored the warnings and were now trapped in eternal regret. Jesus stood beside me, His eyes filled with sorrow. He said, "It was never meant to be this way. I wish no one would perish, but many choose to. Our decisions," He explained, "determine where we'll spend eternity." As He drew me back from this vision, I tried to absorb the truth of what I had just witnessed. It became clear to me that I needed to share this with others. The time to choose was now. Jesus had often spoken about the importance of free will, and in that moment, I understood it fully. God had given each of us the ability to choose whether to follow Him or the ways of the world. This gift of free will was both beautiful and heavy, carrying consequences that extend far beyond this life. I was shown moments from my own life, decisions I had made, some based on faith, others on fear. I realized that every decision, no matter how small, had eternal consequences. We often underestimate the power of our choices, whether in words, actions, or even thoughts. Jesus then depicted individuals at a pivotal point, grappling with their decision-making process. Some were swayed by worldly comforts, while others were torn between their convictions and the allure of convenience. I saw angels guiding those who were seeking wisdom, but Jesus reminded me that each individual must ultimately make the final decision. He stood before me, knocking at the door, saying, "I stand here and knock, but only you can let me in." These words deeply resonated with me, serving as a reminder that Jesus does not coerce Himself into our lives. Instead, He waits for us to invite Him in, demonstrating the weight of free will. This realization was heavy, yet also liberating. I understood that it is our lives to live, and each day brings new opportunities to align ourselves with God's purpose. Even when we make mistakes, He is always there to guide us back onto the right path. But the question remained, will we listen? Before I could ask another, Jesus' expression turned serious. He looked at me with urgency and said that time is running out. My heart sank as I realized the full weight of his words. The world was moving faster than ever before, and the spiritual battle was intensifying. Jesus showed me how distractions, temptations, and worldly influences kept people from seeking the truth. They were so consumed by their desires, by their daily lives, jobs, entertainment, and social media, that they remained oblivious to the spiritual war raging around them. The enemy used these distractions to lull them into complacency, making them believe there was always more time, when in reality, there wasn't. Jesus made it clear that now is the time. It is time to prepare, to strengthen our faith, and to grow closer to God. He showed me people who were spiritually preparing, praying, and reading His Word. Despite the challenges they faced, they remained steadfast in their convictions. I was reminded that spiritual warriors are equipped and prepared for the days ahead. Preparation goes beyond mere knowledge. It is about developing a deep and personal relationship with God. Jesus said, "Those who know me will not be deceived." Those words echoed in my heart. I knew they were not just a statement, but a call to action. Jesus urged me to share this message with the entire world, not just to keep it to myself. He told me to awaken people, to urge them to find Him while there is still time. The urgency was undeniable, and I knew in that moment that my life would never be the same again. As I stood in the presence of Jesus, I felt a shift as I absorbed everything I had seen and learned. The light around me began to fade, and I felt an invisible pull drawing me back. Panic surged through me. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to remain in that place of peace, love, and understanding. But Jesus gently placed His hand on my shoulder and said, "Rachel, your mission is not yet complete." Before I could say anything, I felt myself being drawn through the veil of light, and I found myself back in my room, lying on my bed. I gasped for air, overwhelmed by what I had experienced. My mind was spinning, and my heart was racing. I felt physically weak, but something inside me had changed forever. I sat up, looking around at my familiar surroundings. Though everything seemed the same, nothing felt quite as it had before. The experience had been so vivid, so real, that it felt like I had been transported somewhere else entirely. For years, I struggled to process everything I had witnessed. The weight of the responsibility that Jesus had placed on me felt enormous. I knew I couldn't simply go back to my previous way of life. I had received a warning, a truth that the world desperately needed to hear. But where would I even begin? Who would believe me as I sat trying to make sense of it all? I felt a strong sense of urgency. I knew that Jesus had not shown me all of this for my own benefit. I had to share it, to speak up for those still deceived by the world's lies. Fear crept into my heart. What if someone mocked me? What if they thought I was crazy? But then I remembered Jesus' words. "Fear not, for I am with you." With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and began writing everything down. I knew I had to document it before the details began to fade. Each word I typed felt like a small step toward obedience. With every sentence, the fear gradually subsided, and I realized it wasn't about how people would react. It was about staying faithful to the mission I had been entrusted with. Returning to my normal life was not easy. I found myself struggling with doubts at times. I questioned whether it had truly happened, but deep down, I knew it had. I had seen Jesus. I had witnessed the realities of heaven and hell. Now it was up to me to share what I had experienced. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself, especially the message that Jesus had given me. It was too important and too urgent. But how could I begin? I wasn't a preacher or a scholar, just a normal teenage girl. But I felt a deep, compelling need to share my experience. As I explained each detail to my close friend, she initially seemed skeptical. But as I continued speaking, tears welled up in her eyes. She could sense a sincerity in my voice. And by the time I finished, she hugged me tightly and said, "Rachel, God gave you this for a reason." Encouraged by her support, I began to share my experience with my close friends. My church community listened with interest, while others were more hesitant. Some were unsure what to make of it. I realized that not everyone would believe me, and that was okay. My job wasn't to convince them. It was to inform them of the truth and allow God to work in their hearts. Social media became another platform where I could reach people beyond my immediate circle. I began posting videos and messages explaining what I had seen and encouraging others to turn to God. To my surprise, I received an overwhelming response. People reached out, sharing their own spiritual experiences. Some questioned how they could prepare for what was to come, while others were critical. People who had initially dismissed my experience as a hallucination or a dream hurt me, but I persevered. I reminded myself of Jesus' words, "My sheep hear my voice." I learned to focus less on the critics and more on those who were open and seeking the truth. I had to remember that the battle for our souls is real, despite the widespread deception. Every day, the world grows stronger, and without faith, it's easy to be misled. I encouraged everyone I could to read the Bible, seek God's guidance, and pray for strength. Jesus had shown me that the only way to stand strong in the coming days was to stay as close to Him as possible. I continued to share my story, and in doing so, I realized that my life had a new purpose. My focus was no longer on fitting in or chasing after fleeting, meaningless things. My eyes had been opened to the bigger picture, and I knew I couldn't turn back.